Hey guys, hope you're having a terrific Friday. Glad that you're able to spend this time with me today as we continue our journey really through the Gospel of Luke. And in fact, we're really kind of coming to one of our first major points here. After 3 weeks of walking through Luke, we are completing Luke chapter 1 today. We're completing Luke chapter 1 looking at John the Baptist really from an angle that we don't usually get to look at biblical characters. Luke does give us at times some hints of the upbringing of really the childhood, the teenage years of some of his characters, and he does give that to us here um, concerning John the Baptist. Today we are going to be going, let me switch over here to PowerPoint. Today we are looking at episode 15 together. Really, the Teenage Baptist is what I've entitled this. And recently I was able to go back and watch with the kids Back to the Future, and that, of course, is a classic piece of American cinema, a very fun film to watch. And it's particularly interesting, of course, to see Marty McFly go back and meet George McFly, meet his parents back when they were teenagers, meet his dad, who was, of course, he finds out a lot about his dad and his dad's nerdiness by going back and meeting him in high school. We're going to find out a good deal here about John the Baptist, just taking a look, just briefly in one verse, at his childhood. John the Baptist as a kid, John the Baptist as a teenager, as a young man. It's all kind of summarized here in this single verse, in verse 80. The child grew up and became spiritually strong, and he was in the wilderness until the day of his public appearance to Israel. Again, the child grew up and became spiritually strong, and he was in the wilderness until the day of his public appearance to Israel. Now let's kind of take a look at that verse together, just real briefly. First off, we see him growing, that he's maturing, and that indeed maturing is a process. Maturity is a process that happens in family, as John would interact with Zechariah and with Elizabeth. It's a process that happens in community, as he'd interact with others there in his Judean village. But maturity is definitely a process, and we see him maturing and growing not only physically and not only emotionally and intellectually. I also see that he's growing spiritually. And I want to point out that as important as it is to have community, to mature, to learn those relational skills, to learn what it means to really interact with one another well, what it means to be able to receive good gifts and ask for good gifts, to be able to have win-win interactions with one another. As important as it is to learn all of that, there's really another aspect to maturing as well, and that's, of course, spiritually maturing in our relationship with God. And notice that in order to mature in his relationship with God, we see John the Baptist spending some time alone. Richard Foster teaches about solitude and what a great value that can have in our walk with God, and really developing that relationship with him, and not relying entirely on ourselves and on our relationships, but instead kind of removing at times those crutches from our life, so that we can really focus on building the relationship, that relationship of faith directly with God, that we need and listen, Christian, you do need in your life consistent times alone. And in fact, it's even a good idea to at times have even extended times alone. God can really use those times to prepare you. Notice John's mission, we remember from last time, was to really prepare Israel, prepare the people for the Messiah and for the plan that God had to rescue them from their sins. It's funny that Luke pauses here to remind us that as much as John was to be preparing the people and God was going to use him in that way, God wanted to prepare John, wanted to make him ready for that mission that he had for him. And so John spent time in the wilderness. In the wilderness. Now, don't think, bubbling mountain brooks and tall trees and bears. Well, there may have been some bears around, but our North American view of wilderness is, skewed by the West, right? But in Judea, wilderness really would mean, everywhere in the ancient land of Israel. There's a lot of hills, except in the coastal plain and the Jezreel Valley or Jordan Rift. But I mean, most of kind of the center of Israelite life was in hills. But the Judean wilderness, those hills are actually in many ways, in many places, basically sand dunes. So if you want to think wilderness in Judea, think desert. So here's John, and he's not only going through the normal growth process that kids go through in his family and community, but he's also spending a good portion of his life alone in the wilderness until the day of his public appearance to Israel, having that time of solitude until there's anadexis. And anadexis has the idea of to show forth, to reveal, to publicly enter into a position or to be installed. Until that day, that time when John was to be installed in his role, he was spending a great deal of time in the wilderness, just in solitude with God, as God prepared him so that he could prepare the people for the Messiah. Guys, leads us to the question, of course, what is an area in your life in which you need to mature? What is an area in your life in which you need to mature? Do you need do you need to have time, with family and community to build those relational skills? People upstream and downstream and peers where you can practice those skills. We all need that in our life to mature. But how's your time of solitude with God? Do you need more time just alone with Him in the wilderness? Just learning to trust Him, learning to follow Him, learning to listen to Him. You see, we need to mature not only, emotionally and relationally, but it's also important for us to mature spiritually. Because the more we mature, the truth is we have more and more to offer as we pursue the mission that God has given to us. So I encourage you to even take some time this weekend to spend some time just in solitude with God, just building that relationship with Him, and to also spend some time in community with other Christians, to be building those relational skills. By the way, as Jesus followers, it is urgent, and I mean urgent, that we have time with one another in community. So if you do not currently have a local church, I challenge you to find one, to get plugged in there. If you're here in Chicago, we would love, if you're anywhere here in the Chicago area, we'd love for you to join us here at C3. And if you're uncomfortable yet because of the pandemic to be able to be any place in person, I want to encourage you to at least, you can certainly join us through our Facebook Live worship broadcast at Sunday at 10 a.m. Through our Facebook page, the Chicagoland Community Church Facebook page. So we'd love to see you online. We definitely want to encourage you to have a fellowship with other believers this weekend, and to have some time of solitude, some time just with you and God, and allow both emotional maturity and spiritual maturity to continue to be developed in your life this weekend. Well, the Lord Jesus bless you. Keep following Jesus, and we'll see you next week.